13 years. That's how long Joseph waited. Not in comfort, not in peace, but in silence. Silence from heaven, silence in prison, silence in the face of betrayal and injustice. He was 17 when it began, the dreams, the betrayal, the descent into darkness. He was the favored son, the boy with the colorful coat, the one who dreamed in visions and spoke with innocence. But one day, everything changed. His own brothers, blood relatives, threw him into a pit. Not out of misunderstanding, but out of malice. They hated his dreams, hated his favor, hated his voice, and so they silenced it. They sold him to strangers. He was bound, traded, carried off to a foreign land, Egypt, where he was bought like an object and placed in the house of an Egyptian officer named Potiphar. No longer a son, no longer free, just a slave. But Joseph served. He didn't complain. He didn't revolt. He worked, and God was with him. Even in Egypt, even in silence, even in slavery. And Potiphar saw it. He placed Joseph in charge of everything. The house prospered. But then, another betrayal. Potiphar's wife. Lies. Seduction. A trap laid not for Joseph's failure, but for his faithfulness. He resisted, and she punished him. Not openly, subtly, cunningly, with accusation. And Potiphar believed her. Joseph was thrown into prison. A dungeon. Stripped again of dignity, of position, of hope. He had done everything right, and lost everything again. And God said nothing. No angel appeared. No dream came. No explanation arrived. Just silence. Years passed. And Joseph waited. He waited behind bars while others forgot. He waited while his youth slipped away. He waited while heaven remained quiet. 13 years. From the pit to Potiphar's house to prison. Not one word from God. Not one sign that the dream still lived. Just silence. But not abandonment. Because God was with Joseph. The text repeats this. It whispers it. It reminds us. Even when nothing made sense, God was with him. Because presence does not always come with answers. Sometimes, it comes with endurance. And Joseph endured. Until one day, in the most ordinary way, two prisoners had dreams. Joseph, familiar with dreams, listened. He interpreted. One was restored, one was not. And Joseph made one simple request. Remember me. But the man forgot, and the silence continued. 2 more years. Until Pharaoh dreamed, until the cupbearer remembered, until the prison door opened, until Joseph stood before the most powerful man in the world and spoke the words no one else could. And just like that, the silence ended. 13 years, gone in a moment. 13 years, preparing him for one conversation, one moment, one shift. And Joseph was elevated, from prisoner to prince, from silence to strategy, from forgotten to favored. But this is the part we miss. The silence was not wasted. It was working. God was not absent. He was active, forming, refining, preparing. And Joseph, though he could not see, was being shaped for something far beyond his pain. Insert midpoint call to action. If you're still watching this and you've ever walked through your own season of silence, if you've waited in the dark for a word, a sign, a breakthrough, consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. You're not alone, and someone else needs this reminder too. Let's continue. What came after the silence wasn't just success. It was wisdom. Joseph didn't become bitter. He didn't seek revenge. When his brothers came, hungry, desperate, unaware, he wept, he tested, he watched, and then, he revealed. I am Joseph. Tears, shock, silence again, but this time, it was holy. They trembled, and Joseph spoke the words that could only come from a heart shaped in silence. Do not be afraid. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. That's not optimism. That's revelation. Joseph saw the pattern. He connected the pit to the palace, the prison to the purpose, The silence to the story. He realized something most of us never do until we look back. The silence wasn't punishment. It was preparation. God wasn't ignoring him. God was training him. Each day in Potiphar's house taught him responsibility. Each night in prison taught him resilience. Each betrayal taught him to trust in something deeper than people. And through it all, God remained. Not loud, not obvious, but present. And when the time was right, Joseph was ready. He wasn't just ready to interpret a dream. He was ready to lead a nation, to save millions, to forgive his family, to walk in wisdom that could only come from the silence. Because silence teaches what success never can. It deepens our roots. It purifies our motives. It teaches us to hear the whisper, not just the thunder. And that's what made Joseph a man of God, not the coat, not the position, not even the dream, but the character forged when the dream looked dead. The faith that survived when nothing made sense. The choice to believe, even when there was nothing left to see. 13 years. That's a long time to wait. But when the waiting ends, and the story unfolds, we see what Joseph saw. That silence doesn't mean absence. That suffering can birth salvation. That time does not diminish destiny. It reveals it. And for those of us still in the waiting, still in the silence, this story is a lifeline. Because it tells us that God is still working, still weaving, still watching, even when the heavens feel sealed, even when the cell door won't open, even when you are forgotten by everyone else. God has not forgotten you. He is shaping you. Trust that, hold that, believe that, because Joseph's silence wasn't meaningless. It was the soil where greatness grew. And so is yours. And it's important we pause here, not at the palace, but at the prison, because most of us want to rush through the silence. We want the resolution, the platform, the blessing. But Joseph didn't graduate from pain in a day. He sat with it. He served in it. He grew inside it. That's the quiet miracle we often miss. Not the moment Pharaoh lifted him, but the years Joseph lifted others. Even while he was still bound, he interpreted dreams for men who forgot him. He managed a household that didn't honor him. He bore false accusations without defending himself. Why? Because somewhere in that silence, Joseph stopped waiting for release and started walking in purpose. He chose to live faithfully where he didn't want to be, to lead where he wasn't seen, to serve when no one was watching. And that decision changed everything. It turned the prison into preparation. It turned the silence into shaping. It turned Joseph into someone who could carry the weight of Egypt and the healing of a broken family. When the silence ended, Joseph didn't just speak to Pharaoh, he saved a world. But the greatness we celebrate was born in the years we ignore. So let's not ignore them. Let's ask, what did those 13 years mean? They meant Joseph had time to grow, to forgive, to process, to pray, to choose faith again and again, even when it felt pointless. They meant God was protecting the dream, not delaying it, because a dream fulfilled too early can destroy the dreamer. Joseph wasn't ready at 17. He had the vision, but not the depth, the coat, but not the character, the dream, but not the endurance. But God saw what Joseph didn't, and he used the silence to make him ready. That's the mercy of delay, the kindness of hiddenness, because God is more committed to your transformation than your timeline. He will not promote what hasn't been prepared. He will not release what hasn't been refined. And so he waits, and we wait, and in that waiting, if we choose trust, we become ready. That's what Joseph learned. That's what we are still learning. So don't waste your prison. Don't curse your silence. Lean into it. Let it do its work. Because one day, when the time is right, the silence will break. And everything will shift, just like it did for Joseph. And when it does, you'll see something Joseph saw only later, that God was not just writing a story about Joseph. He was writing a story through Joseph. A story for his brothers. For Egypt, for the generations, a story of provision, reconciliation, salvation. And that's what makes the silence sacred. Because it tells us that our waiting is not just about us. It's about the people we will feed when famine comes. It's about the ones we will forgive when restoration is possible. It's about the voice we'll have when it matters most. And Joseph had that voice. He used it not to boast, but to bless. He saved the very people who sold him. He comforted the ones who betrayed him. He restored the family that abandoned him. Because his heart had been softened in silence, refined by restraint, formed by the unseen hand of God. He could have sought revenge, but he chose mercy. He could have exposed, but he chose to cover. He could have relished his rise, but he chose to bow to something greater than position. That's the fruit of a life formed in silence. It doesn't shout, it serves. It doesn't flaunt, it forgives. And in the end, Joseph's story became something more than a rise to power. It became a reflection of Christ. Falsely accused, forgotten, faithful in silence, and then, exalted, placed in authority, given a name above others, and using that position not for payback, but for provision. Joseph fed a world. Jesus saved it. But both were refined in silence. And both remind us, don't despise the years that feel forgotten. God does his best work in hidden places. And when he brings you out, you'll carry something sacred. Not just success, but wisdom. Not just answers, but anointing. Not just vision, but virtue. And that is worth the wait. Because when God finally speaks, when the doors open, when the dreams come alive, when the waiting ends, it's never just a moment of arrival. It's the unveiling of everything he's been doing all along. And Joseph saw that. He didn't need revenge. He didn't even need closure. He had clarity. And that clarity allowed him to say words most of us could never imagine saying to those who hurt us most. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. That's more than forgiveness. That's vision. That's maturity. That's the voice of someone who saw the hand of God not just in the palace, but in the pit. In the betrayal. In the silence. And maybe that's what this season is teaching you too. Maybe the silence isn't here to punish you. Maybe it's preparing you to speak like Joseph. To live with grace. To rise with humility. To lead with compassion. To forgive what others thought would ruin you. Because the most powerful people in the kingdom are not the loudest. They're the ones who've walked through silence and come out tender. They're the ones who could hurt, but choose to heal. They're the ones who know what it is to be forgotten, and therefore remember everyone they lead. That's the kind of leader God was forming in Joseph. And that's the kind of heart he's forming in you. So if you're still in year 1, or year 10, don't lose heart. You may not see the end. You may not understand the process. But God is not absent. He is not idle. He is forming you in the silence. And when the moment comes, when the doors open, you won't just be delivered. You'll be ready. Ready to speak. Ready to lead. Ready to forgive. Ready to carry what the story requires. And like Joseph, you'll know the truth. That silence wasn't the end of your story. It was the beginning of your becoming. So pause here for a moment. Think of your silence, not as absence, but as assignment, not as exile, but as education. It's where roots grow deep, where identity gets forged, where motives are purified, where intimacy with God becomes more than words, it becomes your lifeline. Because when you can't hear him, you learn to trust his heart. When nothing moves, you learn to anchor in what never changes. That's what happened to Joseph. His silence wasn't empty, it was full. Full of unseen shaping. Full of quiet growth. Full of moments that taught him how to hold power without pride. How to lead without controlling. How to wait without wasting. And maybe that's what this chapter is doing in you. It doesn't look glorious now. It doesn't feel meaningful. But years from now, you may look back and realize this was the place God made you. Not the palace, the prison, Not the moment you were promoted. The years no one saw you. Because that's where character is formed. And when the world needs what only you can carry, you'll be ready. Not because you trained for it, but because you were refined in the fire of waiting. In the silence of God. In the hidden years no one clapped for. So don't rush out of it. Don't resent it. Let it do its work. Let it teach you to see like Joseph. To believe when nothing makes sense. To serve when no one notices. To trust when no one affirms. Because that kind of faith, quiet, steady, tested, is the kind God uses to shake nations. It's the kind that endures famine, heals families, changes history, and it's forged in the quiet, in the space between the dream and the fulfillment, in the silence of God. 13 years, and still, the dream lived. Because what God plants in you will not die in the dark. It may seem buried, it may seem forgotten, but it's being nurtured by something deeper. Faith, surrender, hope. Joseph didn't know what was coming, but he trusted who held his future. That's what gave him strength. Not certainty about outcomes, but confidence in God's character. And when the silence lifted, he was not surprised. He was ready. He stood before Pharaoh not as a broken man, but as a prepared one. He interpreted the dream, offered the plan, and in a matter of minutes, went from prisoner to prime minister. But even that wasn't the miracle. The miracle was that Joseph had not lost his heart in the waiting. He hadn't grown bitter. He hadn't lost his wonder. He hadn't let the silence steal his song. And maybe that's the miracle for you too. Not that your circumstance changes, but that you hold onto your joy, your softness, your hope, your worship, even in the silence. Because if you can praise in the pit, you'll have power in the palace. If you can trust in the prison, you'll carry tenderness when you lead. If you can wait with integrity, you'll rise with wisdom. And the world needs that kind of leader. Not just skilled, not just smart, but sanctified, soft-hearted, secure in God, not in platform. And that's who Joseph became. That's who you're becoming. So hold fast. You're not behind. You're not lost. You're not forgotten. You're being formed. And what God finishes always starts in silence. And when your time comes, when the silence lifts and the doors open and the world sees what God has been doing in you, remember Joseph. Remember that leadership is not about arrival. It's about assignment. It's about service. It's about carrying what others can't, because you've walked where they haven't. That's why Joseph could lead through famine. Because he knew what it felt like to hunger. That's why he could forgive his brothers. Because he knew the cost of being betrayed. That's why he could save a nation. Because he had been refined in isolation. And that's what made him ready. Not just the favor, the formation. So if you're in the silence now, lean into it. Let it make you whole. Let it teach you how to be faithful without applause. Let it prepare you to carry more than your dreams, to carry healing for others. Because God's plans are never small. He may begin with a boy and a dream, but he ends with a man who saves nations. That's the scope of what silence can produce. That's the magnitude of what hiddenness can grow. So take heart. Joseph's silence didn't mean the dream was dead. It meant the roots were growing. And one day, the fruit came. In forgiveness, in reunion, in provision, in blessing. Because God doesn't waste the wilderness. He walks with us in it. He builds us inside it. And when the silence finally breaks, we are not who we were before. We are stronger, softer, wiser, ready. So don't rush the years no one sees. That's where God writes the parts of your story that matter most. The parts that last. The parts that lead. The parts that carry others when famine comes. Like Joseph. And like you. So here's what you can carry with you today. If the silence has been long. If the waiting has worn you thin. If the promises feel distant. You are not alone. You are not disqualified. You are not behind. You are being prepared. Just like Joseph. And when the time is right, The same voice that gave the dream will open the door. Not a second too soon. Not a moment too late. But right on time. And you'll walk through it not as the person who started the journey, but as the one who survived it. Grown, humbled, refined, full of mercy for those who doubted you, full of grace for those who hurt you, full of faith in the God who never left, not for a moment. So let the silence do its work. Let it deepen you, soften you, ready you, because when the story breaks open, and it will, the world won't just hear your voice. They'll see the God who shaped it, who was with you in every pit, in every prison, in every pause. And that is what Joseph's 13 years of silence really were. Not wasted, not forgotten, but woven into a story far greater than he could ever imagine. And so are yours. Wait well, serve faithfully, and when the silence ends, rise, for such a time as this. And when you tell your story, years from now, you'll speak not just of breakthrough, but of formation. You'll say, that season almost broke me, but it built me. You'll remember how God met you in silence, how his presence sustained you in stillness, and how what felt like a delay was actually design. Because that's what Joseph discovered. And it's what we're still discovering now. That even in silence, God is still speaking. God is still shaping. God is still writing a story bigger than we know. And the ending? It's always worth the wait. So don't be afraid of quiet seasons. Don't measure God's love by how loud he seems. Measure it by his faithfulness, the way he stays. Even when no one else does. Even when nothing makes sense. Even when the only answer you hear is silence. Because in that silence, something sacred is happening. Something eternal. Something unshakable. And one day, when the doors open and your name is called, you'll be ready. Because the silence was never the end. It was the making of you. So take courage, breathe deep, and keep going. You are not lost. You are being led, and just like Joseph, you'll see, in time, that every step, every tear, every quiet moment was not wasted. It was written, it was woven, it was watched over, by a God who speaks, even in silence. And when he speaks again, you'll rise into the reason why it all had to take time. Because what he builds in silence lasts forever. And when it's time, the silence will give way to glory. And you'll know, it was never silence after all. It was the sound of God, shaping your soul in quiet, making you ready for everything he promised. And that is the gift of Joseph's 13 years of silence. They made him ready for what only God could see coming. And maybe, that's what he's doing in you too. Wait well, trust deeply. The silence is not the end. It's the beginning of everything God has promised.